You love her voice, you love her looks, but Melissa loves our comic books. Hi, and welcome back. So, this is it. This is the last of my countdown episodes. We're at the final 10 comic books before Action Comics number 1 comes out. And as I said last time, I'm going to be talking about just the features that are my favorites from each of these issues. So, let's dive in. Number 10, Famous Funnies, number 46, Dickie Dare. It's appropriate that we start with Famous Funnies today, the title we started talking about as far back as episode 3. Even with many of their biggest licenses poached, Eastern Color has a good selection of features to fill out this anthology. We haven't talked about these yet, but I enjoy Okie Dokes, Scorchy Smith, and the earlier installments of Adventures of Patsy when it was a fantasy strip. But it should be no surprise that my favorite of all of them is still Dickie Dare. It's Terry and the Pirates before Terry. It's an exciting adventure strip wherein a plucky boy with just the right guardian can take on supervillains. Yes, supervillains in the same mold as the superhero genre to come. We already met the villainous Black Panther in episode 33. This time we'll meet Dr. Sting, a mad scientist, just like the archetypal ones found in the pulpiest of pulp fiction, that will also show up as the very first supervillains in the superhero genre. Like with Captain Easy, though, last episode, maybe this isn't the best example of the greatness of Dickie Dare. This issue, we are dealing with Dr. Sting, and Dr. Sting's lackeys include an Indian, a Japanese man, and the Tiger Princess, who are all bad caricatures. Further, Dickie has been given a new ally besides his guardian Dan Flynn, and that's U.S. Navy man Tubby Martin, who is largely comic relief related to fat shaming. If we ignore these characters, though, the scenario itself is pretty exciting. Dr. Sting wants to operate on his prisoners to transform them somehow in the grand pulp fiction tradition, and other characters have their own agendas. Sita, a servant girl, betrays her master to warn Dickie and leaves for help, and Tiger Princess is smitten with Dan at first sight and has her own plans for him. What I like best about Dickie Dare is that identifying these competing factions and turning them against each other is how a young boy with no special powers like Dickie always comes out on top. And like Jane Arden, we talked about last episode, we see a tight economy of story here. We meet all these characters and learn their motives and some of their weaknesses in just a span of 4 pages. Number 9, feature book number 12, Blondie. Now, I already talked about Blondie in episode 50, so I'm not going to talk too much about it here. This is the first feature book, and indeed the first comic book at all, to exclusively reprint Blondie strips. These are different than the Blondie strips I grew up with more pared down and simpler themes. There is no daughter yet. Alexander is still called Baby Dumpling, despite the fact he appears to be 4 years old now. And from the strips I've seen from 1937, the year this book is reprinted from, um, all of these seem to be domestic slice of life moments with comedic twists, and most of them work. And the humor rings true in a way that continues to do in Blondie throughout the entire multi-decade run. Um, and that's what I have to say about Blondie. Number 8, More Fun Comics, number 31, Dr. Occult. Now, I haven't talked about Dr. Occult since episode 36, but since then, Dr. Occult has remained one of the longest running original characters in comic books up to this point. While Slam Bradley has 13 pages to play around in Detective Comics, this Siegel and Schuster creation has a mere 4 pages still per issue of more fun to tell a story in. And that's required some creative solutions, like taking the concept of a splash page that we see in every Slam Bradley installment and reducing it to a lobby card seen in the first panel here. Have I mentioned that the stories feel rushed? Siegel and Schuster are now accustomed to the 13 pages that they get on Slam Bradley, or the longer length that they had for the Dr. Occult serial stories that they got to tell in the past against Koth or the Lord of Life. Here, they really want to tell a story with the same gravitas. The stakes are high as a madman is animating an army of zombies and commanding them to dig tunnels under the city so they can attack it from underneath. But is the story is flawed. That Dr. Occult identifies the villain as a Haitian because he animates corpses feels a little too much like racial profiling to modern sensibilities. And to wrap up the story really quickly, Dr. Occult uses a never before seen spell to cause a tunnel to collapse on the zombie master. It's just a taste of Dr. Occult at its best, and what I liked about Dr. Occult is that it's where Siegel and Schuster tried out most of their most outlandish and incredible ideas pre-Superman, and makes me wish Dr. Occult was the title that got 13 pages instead of Slam Bradley. Number 7. King Comics, number 26. Now, this issue contains the final pages of Popeye's A Sock for Susan storyline that I covered in depth in episode 50, so I won't summarize it again here. It is appropriate, though, because it was while reading about that storyline that I was finally convinced that Popeye was my favorite King Features character, and until then, I thought that Flash Gordon was my favorite character. Since I have nothing new to say about Popeye yet, let's pretend I hadn't discovered this and talk about Flash Gordon. In this issue, the Outlaws of Mongo storyline begins. There's a great synopsis of it on the Blackgate blog, links in the comments, but I'll summarize it even briefer. This is the 10th story of Flash Gordon, focused on Flash and Dale's continuing adventures in Arborea, ruled by Prince Baron, Timothy Dalton in the movie, though Baron was bald in the comic books. They are celebrating because they think the traitor from the 9th story, Grombo, has died out in the desert, but word reaches them that Grombo is rescued by Ming's forces. It is because of Grombo that Ming learns that Flash and Dale are hiding in Arborea and sends word to Prince Baron to turn them over to him immediately. Flash tries to lure Ming away by escaping into the jungle, but Ming isn't easily fooled. He knows that if he has Dale, Flash will have to come to him. Baron, though, refuses to turn Dale over, and an angry Ming orders Arborea burned down. Flash sees Ming's army coming towards the jungle, towards Arborea on the other side, and commandeers one of the tanks to use against the other tanks, but is captured by none other than now Captain Grombo serving Ming. Meanwhile, Baron orders the evacuation of Arborea, and his wife Aura, with Dale, go to move people from the hospital. There, Dale finds their old friend, the scientist Zarkov, unresponsive while suffering from brain fever. All three of them barely survive the bombing of the hospital, but the shock does bring Zarkov back to his senses. Grombo drags Flash through the desert and delivers Flash to Ming, but Ming is displeased that his prisoner could have been killed, demotes Grombo, and sentences him to 6 months of hard labor. Ming can't even delight in torturing Flash, now because he's delirious from heat stroke. So Flash is hospitalized, just as Dale, Zarkov, and Aura leave on a rescue mission to save Flash. What I like most about Flash Gordon, other than it being a leader in developing the whole space opera genre, is the gorgeous Alex Raymond art, as you've been seeing already. There's more, but only the first 4 pages were reprinted in this issue, and if I told you the whole story, I'd have to make this a spotlight episode on Flash Gordon. For the rest, I'll just refer you to that blog I mentioned earlier, or the Flash Gordon Classic Collection recently published by Mad Cave Studios. Number 6. Popular Comics number 29. And what a shame it is that Popular Comics has lost so much of its quality features to Super Comics that I now have to struggle to find a new favorite feature in what's left. This Tom Gray story, for instance, is adapting the cowboy movie The Painted Trail, is well drawn by some unknown hand, but I've just never been a fan of westerns. Mutt and Jeff is enjoyable enough, but I'm going to go with Don Dixon and the Hidden Empire. Don Dixon is now my favorite of what's left, having recently come over to this title from the Funnies, where it was when I last talked about Don Dixon back in episode 22. It's always hard to tell what's going on in Don Dixon in bits and pieces, and we only get 2 pages of Don Dixon in this issue, but I'll try to piece it together for you. Don had surrendered to the usurper Kath in the hopes of trading his life for Princess Wanda and her father the king. But Kath tosses them all in a cell awaiting their executions. Meanwhile, Don's friends have waited too long in the Black Forest and decide to use a secret tunnel to reach the city themselves. That night, Mala, Koth's consort, who has the hots for Don, tries to convince him to flee with her, but he won't leave Wanda and her father behind. In the morning, as their allies mass into the city, the king delays their execution with his last bargaining chip, the secret location of the Kingdom of Faria's treasure vault. And while Don Dixon is obviously a Flash Gordon clone, only situated on a hollow world setting instead of other planets, it's still a pretty good clone. Number 5. Detective Comics number 15. Spy. Speed Saunders is pretty good, Sam Bradley is a close second, but Bart Regan's Spy is still my favorite. One of the reasons I've talked about this before is their relationship and the chemistry between suave Bart Regan and his seemingly silly but actually quite smart and competent partner Sally Norris, like a gender-reversed Agent 86 and Agent 99 in Get Smart. And that comparison is most apt here because this issue scenario is played for laughs, and it's clear that Siegel and Schuster are having a lot of fun with it. They have been assigned to capture Mr. Death, an international assassin of other spies who no one has ever seen and lived. Sally decides she's going to lure Mr. Death out into the open by placing a classified ad taunting him and giving her name and hotel location. Bart bets her $1 it will never work, and when Mr. Death shows up, she asks for her $1. Sally's intuition that Mr. Death has maniacal pride keeps paying dividends as she baits him into giving a full confession as well. Her only misstep, though, was relying on the police for backup because they think that she was just a crank calling them. And there's maybe two ways to interpret this. One is that Sally has to make a mistake here because she's a woman and it's really Bart's strip and the man has to do something, right? But maybe instead this is about the theme of men underestimating women and the police not believing Sally just like Bart didn't is all part of that theme. The last page is rather silly, with both Mr. Death and Bart fumbling their attacks so badly for no reason that allows Sally the chance to punch Mr. Death from behind and knock him down. Sally is the hero of this story, and Bart looks genuinely appreciative as he embraces her in the final panel. Now, this is not the only spy story that has this comedic approach and uses Sally to lead the story, but I rather enjoy them, and I think it's one of the best parts about Spy. It's also important to pause and talk about the advertisement in every issue from Detective Comics this month. Action Comics is coming and everyone this month knew it. Number 4, New Adventure Comics number 26. Federal Men. Is it any surprise that I went for the Siegel and Schuster story? Federal Men has never been my favorite though, but this is an important one. For one thing, there is no traditional villain in this story. The story is about the social ill of, yes, children not using proper safety at crosswalks. It seems silly at first until page 3 when a drunk driver leaves this little girl Jane crippled in the street, and then we're reminded shockingly about the serious issue that this was all along. But there's something on this page that you would miss if you just looked at the art and skipped the captions, because one of them tells us that that police car, has Sandy Keene and Larry Dugan in it. And that changes everything, because those are the characters from the Radio Squad feature in More Fun Comics. So not only is this the first crossover between comic book titles ever, but it is the birth of a shared universe that two comic book features both exist in. This has never been implied before, even in comic books, and very rarely in comic strips even. While the glory days of Federal Men were all at the beginning when this was a science fiction strip, there's still things to recommend about this watered-down version of Federal Men, at least this month. Number 3, Feature Funnies number 9. This was a tough one for me. because this title is now the home of Joe Palooka, Jane Arden, and Dixie Dugan, and I really like all those strips. But I have to go with Will Eisner's Hawk of the Seas on this one. I last talked about Hawk of the Seas in episode 46, so let's just take a look at what Hawk is up to now. Hawk's personal war against the evil pirate Claw Carlos is drawing to a close with a personal duel between them below deck while their crews fight above deck. Now Carlos surprisingly wins this duel, but by default because Hawk passed out from blood loss. This would be the end of the strip, but the Native American buccaneer serving under Hawk, Sagua, intervenes while spouting some broken English. But he captures Carlos and then revives Hawk. But Sagua doesn't get to become the main character, as we quickly in mid-page jump to a new story focused once more on Hawk. In it, we start to learn a little bit more of Hawk's backstory, how his father was a world traveler and left a special gift for his son that Hawk would inherit someday after he'd proven himself worthy. It's a locket that plays music when the wearer is in danger, and as it's shown to him, it's already playing music. It's an interesting choice giving Hawk a magic item, one that almost anticipates the superheroes to come. Only Will Eisner didn't seem to like this idea very much, and the locket is forgotten entirely after this initial story about it. What I like best about Hawk of the Seas are the flashes of inspiration we see in this early Will Eisner art that show the greatness of things to come from him, like Soon in the Spirit. Number 2. The comics number 8. Rod Ryan of the Sky Police. This issue and the next one in my countdown were released just 2 days before the debut of Superman, and my pick for this comic book would have been Wash Tubbs, but Wash Tubbs has disappeared from the contents of this title as of this issue, leaving Rod Ryan the embarrassment of winning by default, just like Claw Carlos. Now, I just talked about Rod Ryan as recently as episode 51, so this is just one issue later. Rod has woken up after being gassed by the Unicorn warriors. In the meanwhile, they have abducted his girlfriend Karen. Before Rod can do anything about it, he is ganged up on by 3 Mephetians. Before they can beat him up, bear in mind that this is science fiction and the Mephetians do have destructor flame guns, but like on Barsoom in the John Carter books, there's this rule of etiquette that you don't attack someone using a lesser weapon. So if someone attacks you barehanded and you're an alien, then you don't get to use your guns. But like Han Solo, Rod Ryan shoots first. Then one of the Unicorn warriors, Lieutenant Taro, comes back and says, "Oh, we thought you were one of those guys." So to make it up to him, Taro gives Rod a lift in his ship. But just as they catch up to the other ships, including the one that has Karen in it, they are ambushed by more ships, and Taro's ship is shot out of the sky. I still have no idea what rank Rod is in the Sky Police and why he wears almost no clothes. Maybe in the Sky Police you'll only get an article of clothing for every rank you've passed up through. It's really not even as good as Don Dixon in trying to be Flash Gordon, but that's the comics for you, at least this time. Number 1. The very last comic book to be published before Action Comics number 1. Tip Top Comics number 26. Now I expected I would be talking to you about Tarzan at this point, so much so that I started already preparing notes about Tarzan. And it does boast impressive Hal Foster artwork. The character was created by Edgar Rice Burroughs, my second favorite author of all time, after Tolkien, and Tarzan spawned the entire jungle genre. But that last point is really the sticker for me. I just don't like the jungle genre. So no matter how much I tried reading the early Tarzan strips and getting into them, it just feels meh to me. And because I like to support the underdog, I was tempted to go with Jim Hardy. Since I didn't, let me just give you a brief explanation on that strip. So, Stan Moores was an assistant to Chester Gould on Dick Tracy in the 1930s until he got the chance to do his own strip. And the strip that he came up with was Jim Hardy. The idea, as I've read about it online, is that it was supposed to be like a dark Dick Tracy type setting, but with a lighter character in it. I really think, though, that Chester Gould's Dick Tracy is not the real inspiration of this strip. From what I read of it, I feel like they're missing the point. It is like Joe Palooka. He's a very innocent guy, but he's not born innocent. He's not naive because he's a little dumb. He's actually a man with a dark past who's chosen to turn his life around and intentionally be good and innocent. And it keeps coming back and hurting him because he is in a world, unlike Joe Palooka, where the world, rewards him for being innocent. The world just keeps pounding down on Jim and putting him in scrape after scrape. And I really get that. That resonates for me. But it didn't resonate for readers, and the strip didn't last very long. In fact, it probably reprinted in comic books longer than it lasted originally in comic strips. Um, and I think what might have killed it was not the subject matter or even the setup, but the art itself, or rather the character design for Jim Hardy. If Jim Hardy had been like a small wash tubs type guy, then he would have projected the image of an underdog that he was meant to go with. But in appearance, Jim Hardy is actually this big, beefy guy who looks like he beats up little guys like wash tubs. And it really goes against the visual elements go against the impact of the story. And anyways, I like Jim Hardy, but it's not my winner. Lil Abner is the only real competition for me in this title, and um, for sheer inventiveness. I talked about Lil Abner extensively last time. I don't have newer strips to show you for it, so we're gonna just end there for today. I've got lots to do anyways. We're gonna be moving to a new apartment, cross my fingers, soon. And it's also about to get really cold tonight, so I have to bring my plant in before it gets too cold. You can see that, just a few videos ago, I was wearing some really light dresses, and now I'm already in turtlenecks. So we'll see what I'm wearing next time and where I'm filming from. And I hope to engage with you again. Thanks for coming. Bye bye.